Hello and welcome to the Futurist Letters show. My name is Cairo Smith. I am the founder and editor-in-chief of Futurist Letters, the journal. I am also the host of the Futurist Letters show, which you are listening to right now. This is an interview episode, and for the first time, at least in taping order, I am not joined by one of my stalwart co-hosts. We had a little bit of a scheduling surprise, and so you are going to have me all to yourself today. So I think that this will be an interesting little experiment. We will see how it goes. If you want to watch the show with video, you can find it at futuristletters.com. That is on Substack. It's also on YouTube with video. And if you would like to listen maybe on the go, you can find it on Spotify. You can add it to Apple Podcasts and add it anywhere else you can add a podcast RSS feed. Now, if you would like to sponsor the show, as you probably know, this is where your sponsor message will go. So please consider going to futuristletters.com and becoming a sponsor. Your efforts, your generosity will keep the show running, and we will also get your message out to our listeners. If you want to become a paying subscriber, if you're not already, that will also get you access to the after shows where I chat with my co-hosts, or perhaps this time just monologue in a somewhat deranged fashion, all by myself, about how the episode went, where we messed up, what we got right, etc. So you'll find that after this on futuristletters.com for paying subscribers. That also gets you access to all the journal behind the scenes. So with that, I'd like to wrap up the business and say today we have the one and only Kathleen Stock here as our guest. This is a woman whose book, Material Girls, I read. This had a big impact on me. She is one of a kind, and I am very honored to have her as a guest. She is doing us a great kindness by coming on. So, Kathleen, I say, nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. And for those who don't know, tell us a little about yourself and what you do.
Well, thanks very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. So I am a writer now. That is my main job. And I'm what's called a contributing editor at Unheard, which is an online publication, and I write a column for them once a week. I do other short form writing for newspapers, and I write books. Up until 2021, I was a professor of philosophy at the University of Sussex in the UK. So that was most of my career has been spent in academia, teaching philosophy, researching philosophy, just being a, standard academic. Mm-hmm. However, for no reasons we'll no doubt get into, partly to do with the book that you've read, things got quite difficult for me. So I decided eventually to leave, and I'm much happier now. So it's given me an opportunity to write, which is really, turns out, what I kind of should have been doing all along, and
that's good.
Enjoy a lot more.
It's interesting you say opportunity to write, because at least on paper, academia involves a lot of writing, but there's a different quality, I suppose, to the writing you're doing now.
Oh God, yes. I wrote a book as a philosopher about the nature of imagination and fiction. And sometimes it's quite funny, because since I've started to write books for the general public, people have started buying my back catalogue, as it were. So I don't know if you know, but like with academic books, normally you don't get very much money out of them. Mm-hmm. You don't start off with a good deal to start with, and then after a couple of years, nobody buys it. But I am getting a regular income up to, a smaller, but still relative to the norm, right, substantial income from this old book, because people are buying it. And it's so hilarious that I'm sure they're shocked when they get it, because the prose style is obviously totally turgid. The sentences go on forever. It was just written in a sort of standard academic way where you're not allowed to show any kind of wit or ingenuity. You have to kind of fend off every possible objection to the thing you're saying, which turns it into this awful literal-minded piece of prose. So now I don't have to do any of that anymore. which is a relief.
Do you end up engaging in those sort of preemptive counter arguments, at least in your development stages of working on your pieces,
No,
or what
no.
does your
I mean,
process
the
look
thing
like?
is, well, so if we're talking the columns, then obviously I just write them in a day. So
Right.
one of the beautiful things about the essay form, which I love a lot, is that you don't have to thrash your ideas to death, as it were, by taking, because you don't have time, you don't have space, and you don't have the reader's attention. So you can raise intelligent questions or suggest intelligent answers, but you know leave it for the reader to think whether it works or not. You can also trust your reader a lot more than I could ever trust, bizarrely in a way, because I don't know why the norm has become in academic writing that you don't really trust your reader, but I now can make jokes that are quite obscure and know that at least some of my readers will get them. You know, I can make literary references that they'll recognize. So
Do
all of
these
that is
readers
great.
do you read the comments? Do they reply? Do you have a back and forth relationship with these people?
I should not. I hate to say. Well, I certainly would never. No, I'm not replying to the comments. That way, craziness lies.
Uh-huh.
Um, I mean, I'm loath to. Let's just assume none of my readers are going to hear this. Yes, I read the comments. Yes, I
All
read the
right. Well,
comments.
for my sake, I
Yeah.
hope they do, but perhaps for your sake, I hope they
I
don't.
mean, they're
We'll
not
see.
always kind, obviously,
The
and also
comments.
I think people who comment below the line as a certain kind of psyche, without wishing to, you know, upset anyone, it's not necessarily the comments are not necessarily representative of everyone that's reading that piece, because
Right.
you have to be moved to hit the keyboard. Plus, it's the same people every week. So, and they formed a kind of mini community where they all recognize each other. So that's fine, and I'm
The
glad that they're doing
commenters.
that. But the commenters, but they're
Mhm.
not, they're not necessarily
It's funny. It's
representative.
very funny for me to hear you say without wishing to upset anyone, because I think you've perhaps unintentionally
Upset everybody.
upset more people than maybe any philosopher in quite a while. So I think, since we do have to get into this at some point,
Yeah, we do.
it's worth getting into near the top, just for the sake of people who aren't up to speed. I'm
Hmm.
going to give the very brief exogenous view of this, and then you can correct me where you think that this
Sure.
is wrong. So you wrote, and even before this, you were making your views known, but
Mm.
you engaged in analytic philosophy. You were concerned with the definitions and sort of um, uh, labels that we use for things and apply as metaphysical, physical categories. And you set out to talk about what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, both broadly for society and in the context of your own sex and sexuality as a lesbian woman. And
Mm.
this upset a lot of people involved in this um, upsurge of, I guess you'd say, queer identity and all the things that compose that. And
Mm.
there was a lot of flack, and a lot of people came out in support of you and against you, not just your work,
Mm.
but you personally as a human being and
Oh yeah.
a professor. And this resulted in you ultimately voluntarily resigning from your role as a professor, either in
Mm.
part or entirely because of that discourse.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
That's right. I mean, it misses out. So this was in 20, I wrote this book in 2021, and that's when I resigned.
Mm-hmm.
I had been writing on sex and gender for a few years, like newspaper articles, blog posts, and stuff like that. Um, but it misses out a bit of context, which is worth rehearsing, because I didn't just out of the blue decide one day, oh, I'm going to poke that particular bear.
Mm-hmm.
um, there was it's even hard to remember, but when I started, which was around 2017, 18, there was a consultation happening in the UK about whether we should make what's known as a gender recognition certificate um, open to what's now known as self ID. Like, basically, can a male let's just focus on the male case, but can a man
Mm-hmm.
walk into a office and say, I'm a woman now? give me a gender recognition certificate. According to the government at the time and every other political party, yes, they should be able to. And moreover, they should be able to go into any female changing room, any female sports team, all
So
the
what
stuff
does
that's
this
become incredibly controversial since then. That was
what does
starting,
this
and that's when
do,
I
this
started writing.
gender recognition certificate in
Well,
the
that's a
UK?
good question. I mean, actually, it gives you it was pretty unclear then, and it's even more unclear now because there's been so many developments. I don't know if I could even
Hmm.
begin to sum them up. I mean, the law has been clarified since then about what actually trans-identified people have a right, which spaces and resources they have a right to use in terms
Hmm.
of the opposite sex. Um, but at the time, it gave you nominally anyway. It was widely supposed to give you privacy, so it was supposed to be like nobody had a right to ask you. You could give them your new certificate, and it also gave you a right, I think, to a new birth certificate. So basically, you could if you had taken loads of hormones and had loads of surgery, then it would
Hmm.
match the perception of you, and that would be less embarrassing if you had to present your birth certificate and it didn't seem to
Right.
match. All of that
Uh,
was fine, and we had gender
mhm.
recognition protected under the Equality Act. But what was changing was this more radical stance, which is like you don't even need a certificate. Actually, these people were saying, anyone who feels like they're a woman is a
Mhm.
woman. Never mind the surgery, never mind the hormones, never mind the certificate. Even um, at that point, so then basically institutions across the UK were changing their policies to allow self ID. Again, not really much to do with certificates, as it turned out. It was more like, does he feel like he's a woman? Oh well, now she's a
Right.
woman, she's a she, and please do come into the female changing room, and yes, you can join the sports team, and yes, you can win the feminist prize. You go straight to the
Yeah.
front of the queue. In fact, quite often, and all of
It's
that seemed to me completely mad. So yeah.
it does seem that changing rooms and bathrooms are really a flashpoint, or sort of the most fraught
Mm.
battleground, at least here in the US, for these
Prisons are pretty
things,
bad. Prisons are pretty
because
bad.
I would say that in most spaces, there's actually a fairly large majority of opinion, at least in my perception, one way or the other. For example, with sports,
Mm.
um, when you see someone with an obvious advantage in their musculature and what have you winning in sports, at least in my social circles, a majority of people say this doesn't seem right. And similarly, it seems like when it comes to, say, um, pronoun use or how you dress, most people seem to have this sense of, well, you can do what you like. And then it's like when it comes to the bathrooms, that's when it's right down the middle, you know?
Mm.
Um, that's
I
that's
think.
what I see here. And there's something I wanted to point out
Mhm.
from your book that I found very interesting because there's a lot of, I would say, sort of internet shadowboxing against TERFs, and this is actually worth getting into. TERF, the
Mm.
acronym meaning Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. I actually want to ask first: is this something you uh, take as a label of yourself? This acronym?
I'm not a radical feminist. I've made that pretty clear.
Well, there you go.
Um,
It is,
I'm not trans. What does it mean by trans exclusive? I mean, it's set up to be
yeah,
pejorative. Um, I in the book, I'm extremely careful
you are.
to say, in terms of all of the standard roster of rights should apply to everybody, no matter what. We're not talking about rights. Actually, we're talking about um, who goes where in which bathroom. Obviously, everyone should have access to bathrooms, changing rooms, sports
Right.
teams, but it's which ones. And just on the bathroom point, I mean,
Yes.
yeah, it's unfortunate. I actually didn't talk about that much about bathrooms in the book, but it does, and I don't really know. I can't judge the American cultural context. It does seem to me it's a bit different for you guys. You have different perspective on freedom, um, and a much stronger sort of emotional commitment to self
Yeah.
determination, possibly due to
And I
your
think that that will come up
constitution and all that.
when we talk
But
about your
we, but
upcoming
but
book.
but
Yes.
the bathrooms and the changing rooms are fundamental once you've got self ID around, because
Hmm.
bathrooms and changing rooms are where women and girls undress and are vulnerable. And bathrooms, for instance, are places where sex crimes occur, where
Mm-hmm.
voyeurism occurs, where cameras get shoved under cubicles.
Mm-hmm.
So while it's the average sort of hipster doesn't want to talk about that, doesn't want to think about that stuff, it happens. And if you say, oh, now basically we've made these spaces unisex, effectively we've made them unisex because we've just said we've made it explicit, you can come in no matter what you look like, no matter what your sex, then it's unisex. So now we've made it a more dangerous
Mm-hmm.
space for the women that still have to use that space. So that's really the reason. And I think when you spell it out to people like that, they actually are more on my side. To be honest, the average person does not want to share a bathroom with the opposite sex.
The one thing that surprised me was that, and you talked a lot, it's funny, you talked a lot about the methods of definition and various intersex conditions and coming down to sort of basically like androgen sensitivity, which I thought was very interesting. But
Mm.
regarding the bathrooms, I believe you actually said at one point that you did feel under some circumstances the place for a, I guess you'd say, perfectly passing uh, trans woman would be in the women's restroom as long as they were essentially unnoticeable.
I mean,
Is
this is.
that right?
I feel like for your listeners, this is jumping right. I don't mind doing it, but it's the book is not all about bathrooms, and actually,
No,
I'm
it's not.
really not particularly normative. I have everyone wants you to have a chapter at the end where you say the way forward. This was also written in 2021. Things have moved on a lot since then in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
But basically the position it doesn't let's talk changing rooms, dormitories, prisons. We still do have male fully intact, genitally intact rapists in female prisons. Why are
Mm-hmm.
they there? Should they be there? That's the sort of question. It is an interesting question, that goes beyond like who pees where. Um,
Right.
but
Well, enough of
on that
bathrooms.
general, on that general issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? My position is lay out the rules for the space, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it used to be that the rules were males go to male places, females go to females places. That is the explicit rule, and that's the expectation, and everyone understands the norm. Now, with that as the norm and the expectation across like massive swathes of the population, if you get a passing trans man or a passing trans woman, then that basically goes in the opposite sex bathroom. I don't think you can. There's no way to stop that. It would be very illiberal to kind of police that. The whole thing depends on norms of behavior. It's not,
Yes.
nobody's asking for your certificate at the door. Nobody's asking, quite rightly. This is
And
where the other side come in with their sort of insanely
that's the
hyperbolic,
characterization that you see. It's
genital
like,
checks
oh,
at the
you want
bathroom
to
door.
do genital checks,
Yeah,
right?
no,
This
I
is like a
don't.
very
And
very
funnily enough, I
common
don't.
accusation. Yeah.
I want the norms to go back to the way they were, so that then
Right.
around the edges, around the edge cases, like, I'm not so much of a fanatic that I say, never can that happen. But what happened was that are all across the UK, our institutions, from the government down, the BBC down, the Guardian down, every liberal media outlet went along with this, every political party, they all said, change the norms. And
Mm-hmm.
now anyone can go anywhere. And at that point, chaos arrives. You get women assaulted, which has, of course, obviously happened since then. And you also get a huge lot of confusion and distress. And you have sexual assault survivors who now won't go into certain spaces for fear that they meet a man there. And the whole thing has gone wrong. So really, like I say, I'm not concerned with edge cases very much, because they're all, whatever rules you have, there will be edge cases. What I hate is when people try and make the edge cases the norm,
Right.
and then chaos follows.
Do you feel like you just said something that struck me? You said I want things to go back to the way they were. Is this almost sort of a a doomed a
Oh yeah, they're
rallying
not going
cry
back.
to ever say something like that? I mean, can things ever go back to how they were?
This, I mean, I don't. I meant only in this respect. Although actually,
Hmm.
there's plenty of things going wrong at the moment. I wouldn't mind if they corrected. But what was so frustrating about this issue is that it just didn't have to be this way. Um,
So acrimonious.
like I it didn't have to be so acrimonious and it didn't have to be so radical. Like, if the whole thing could be done again and the trans activist organization said, trans identified people feel uncomfortable in the spaces they're in. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a lot of political will behind building third spaces for them, or third sports
Mm-hmm.
teams, or have an open sports section as well as a closed one. If
Mm-hmm.
they had done that, then we'd be in a different place, but they didn't. Across the world, across the Anglophone world, they basically said, you will submit, you will comply, you will call me mom. Not only that, but I'm a lesbian, they would say, you will
Mm-hmm.
treat me as a fellow lesbian and you will admit me into your dating app and I am a lesbian just like you, all of that. And that's bad enough. But then like I keep saying, the government went along with it. On your side of the pond, Biden's gone along with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's so stupid and self-defeating, and we haven't even talked about the chaos it causes for children when they get dragged into this, and they're the ones that end up having surgeries and taking irrevocable cross-sex hormones,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the 40-year-old late transitioning man in a dress, doesn't chop his genitalia off on average. So there's a lot of total madness has come in through this, and yeah, it didn't have to be this way. And I hope
There's
that we
another
can correct. Yeah.
there's another part that stood out to me, and then I've seen it discussed a bit online that I wanted to ask.
Hmm.
It's funny. Most of the discussion of your book that I see online seems to be in somewhat bad faith, but I think that's mostly the filters that I'm in. But
You don't
there's a
say.
part where you say you're talking about children, you're talking about young girls, and that's the section that actually
Mm.
gave sort of the title of the book, is this sort of draw of being pulled into um, either becoming transgender or non-binary or what have you, and then being led into taking hormones, things like that, when they're not even 18. And you
Mm.
said something to the effect of, if I had been born decades later, I could have seen myself potentially being drawn into something like this, not knowing any better. And people pull
Mm.
this section and they go, oh, that's it. She's actually trans. That's the secret to all of this. She's closeted trans. And so how does that make you feel?
Yeah, I saw someone saying, "Is it really bad that like I think of Kathleen Stock as a trans man and it turns me on?"
What? That started strange, and then it got even stranger by the end. But
Yeah, yeah, I
I don't
know.
know. Yeah.
Well, these people are strange. No, that's not a
Okay.
surprise. Um, Look, I don't know. I don't know. It depends which demographic we're talking to. These people you're seeing, thank God my filters are now set that I don't have to see that shit anymore. But,
Mhm.
if they're like 15, you never
Yeah.
know the age of anyone on the internet. They're probably like 15. They've got no idea how this shit works. This is their explanation of why I'm writing this book. They've got no idea about the British context, and they certainly have no idea about what they might feel like in 40 years' time when they have had a double mastectomy or a hysterectomy, before the
Hmm.
age of 20. That's the demographic I'm worried about. And could I have got sucked into that? Anyone could, pretty much. But yeah, I mean, as it happens, I'm 6 foot tall woman. I was 6 foot tall at the age of 14. I was very different to my peers in many ways.
Hmm.
And if I went online and found a narrative that told me that the reason, I mean, not told me, but suggested seductively, whispered in my ear,
Hmm.
maybe, then yeah, why not? I mean, but that's not because I'm unusual. I think I've seen the strangest. I mean, what I'm trying to say is you can't predict who's going to identify as trans. Like, I've seen fully masculine looking 19-year-old boys deciding that they're girls. I mean,
Hmm.
it's a period where everything's up in the air and you're trying out new identities, and I think anyone could do it. Specific, and if they're very unhappy, and the online world calls to them, then why not?
The online world, certainly its own topic. I have a lot of thoughts about the internet and exposure to the internet for kids. I do
Hmm.
want to get away from Material Girls because, as you said, it's a few years old and the culture has moved on. And
Hmm.
you have a book that you are working on currently, right? Would you tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
Well, I'm gone from sex and gender to death.
Okay.
um, so it's a book about what's called assisted dying, but I would prefer to call it assisted death because you're really not being helped in the period of dying. You're being killed basically, or you're
Hmm.
being helped to commit suicide. Um, so again, the impetus for this is has a local context because Britain is about. It looks like, unfortunately, we are about to bring in assisted death delivered through our National Health Service, which is a public health service. So, in other words, if you've got a diagnosis of terminal illness, 6 months to live or less, if you can find a doctor that will tell you that you've got 6 months to live or less, then in a few years' time, you'll be able to just basically have a few appointments,
Hmm.
be vaguely questioned, but not really about your motives, as it turns out, and then they will help you to die. Now, that's already the case in America in some states.
Yes.
Um, it's also the case in Canada, and it's actually, um, in my view, so it's assisted dying legislation is being pushed in all sorts of places. It's coming in Germany. It's going to be in more American states soon. I believe there's a bill in New York that's going through. So it's something in the air at the moment. It connects very much up to ideas that are present in the transactivist discourse about autonomy, freedom, but
Hmm.
also a kind of pseudo idea of compassion, looking to doctors to relieve you of your distress. um, this time, fairly definitively, because they're going to kill you. And
You're
if
probably less likely to sue them afterwards if you're dead.
exactly, there's not very much lived experience in this domain. Uh, so now, I think a lot of people coming to this think, well, what so what? If they want to do it, that's up to them.
Hmm.
It's really not that simple. One of the big worries about the way it will be delivered in Britain is that it's through the National Health Service, as it is also in Canada. So if you want to look at a country where it's absolutely going hideously wrong, then in fact, The Atlantic only 3 days ago just published a massive long read, which really does give a sense of some of the problems in Canada. Um, it's been chosen by more and more people. They've just, as soon as they bring in assisted death for terminally ill people, then other groups come in and go, well, what about us?
Hmm.
um, this is unequal treatment. So there's also now a track for disabled people who have no terminal diagnosis.
Hmm.
They've ratified but have yet to bring in a track for people who are just mentally ill and have no physical disability at all.
That seems
In Belgium,
quite controversial.
well, yeah, and that's already happening in Belgium and Holland. So in Belgium and Holland, you've got basically kids in their 20s with multiple mental illness diagnoses like BPD, autism,
Hmm.
OCD, etc., saying that their suffering is so unbearable that they want to be euthanized, and they're getting it. And they have no physical underlying condition. So there are also children euthanized in Holland through a protocol called the Groningen Protocol. So basically, there's a lot to talk about, and I've spent the last 6 or 7 months just building a case against organized assisted death. So this isn't
A
about whether
moral and
one person
ethical
helps another
case?
person. Sorry, say again.
A moral or ethical case? Or what
Yes.
sort of case?
Well, it's not about. This is a common kind of misunderstanding. I don't think the issue in this realm is whether it is right or wrong for one individual to help another individual to die. To be honest, I think it depends on the circumstance. And some religious people will say absolutely not, never.
Hmm.
But it seems to me that, you can imagine situations where someone's suffering so intensely and there's no hope of their recovery
Hmm.
that it might well be the right thing to help them to die. That's not the question. The question is, does a government and a health service introduce protocols to offer assisted death at scale to people? So that's no longer about sort of rights and wrongs of a particular situation. This is a huge or organized initiative that will raise all sorts of questions about who gets access to it and who's doing the checking as to whether there's any coercion involved, for instance, background coercion. Most elderly people will end up being diagnosed as having 6 months or less to live, or having some terminal condition like frailty is sometimes offered in Canada as the reason.
Really?
So, what are we checking that their relatives aren't pushing them into this? Huge numbers of people who take this route say that they're doing so because they feel like they're a burden. I mean, they explicitly say they feel they're a burden on their relatives or their carers. In Canada, lots and lots of people are doing it because they can't afford decent care, or they're not getting it, or they're on waiting lists, and it'll be quicker to die than to get access to the social care. In Canada also, you can get same day death, so you can literally just phone a hotline and get it that day. So all sorts of dystopian things are happening, and they're going to continue to happen, I'm afraid. So that's what the book's about.
It's funny for me. I can see many different lines by which someone could disagree with you on this. I think perhaps the most callous one, and it really seems to me that, at least in the Western world, a lot of this is downstream of two things. One is sort of the inverted population pyramid, and the fact that we really just can't sustain our numbers of elderly with the tax base that we have. It seems obvious there's sort of a budget balancing reason to do this. But the second, as you said a little bit, is sort of an increasing lack of religiosity. That sort of Catholicism, Anglicanism, a lot of these sects have very strict taboos against suicide and killing, right? And it seems like in a more secular or irreligious world, one could almost say to you, well, if someone wants to die because they feel like they're a burden or their life is terrible, who are you to stop them from making that choice, right?
That's what they say all the time. I mean, that's
who are
the
you to
standard
stop that
response. But I mean, the thing is, firstly, on your first point, yes, absolutely. That is an argument that is being, I mean, it's still taboo, but there's 2 British newspaper columnists that have used it. And I have a chapter on the utilitarian. It's a utilitarian argument, basically. Like, we need a mechanism to kill off the old and dependent because we can no longer afford the pension system, and also the birth rate's dropping. So there's just not going to be enough people to balance it out. So yeah, that's an argument. I mean, in a way, that's it relates to your second point, because I see this as a challenge. The whole thing's a challenge. Yes, you're right. I think you're right. Obviously, religiosity is overall on the decline, although actually, apparently, there's kind of resurgence in various places amongst young people, particularly Catholicism. So, but let's leave that aside.
I'm very suspicious of these young Catholic converts. They seem very... They seem to not agree with anything their Pope says, which makes me wonder why would you become a Catholic?
That's a bit weird about... I thought the point of being Catholic was you were supposed to just go along with it. But leave that aside. Let's assume you're right about the lack of religiosity. I think this really does, to me, this moment is a stark challenge, right? Okay, so we haven't got the Catholic or the evangelical principles to fall back on. So what are we going to do? Are we just going to throw up our hands and say, okay, anything goes, anyone can do anything to themselves at any time? And bearing in mind that this is not just a request to be left alone. Assisted dying is assisted, right? So you're actually arguing that there should be a government assistance to help you die. Now, that's completely different to being left alone. That is actually not non-interference. That is something else. So how these arguments go is, typically, having looked at many of them, the first move is compassion. people are suffering here. We really need to help them. They are suffering unbearably. They need to die. There's nothing else we can do, which is, of course, not true. Most of the time, you could give them some better drugs or social care or whatever, but that would be expensive. So the first move is compassion. And that's obviously why they pick the terminally ill and the disabled. They assume that these lives are not worth living. That is the underlying assumption. But at that point, someone like me comes in and goes, okay, well, if it's compassion, then maybe we should be thinking about more creatively about alternatives to death. Maybe we could build up a better social care system, or or palliative care. Palliative care deals with a lot of the phenomenon that the assisted dying lobby would say means that their case is really strong. Like, pain can be controlled, confusion can be controlled, opiates are very sophisticated these days, and so on. So at that point, someone will come in and say, oh, never mind about that, it's autonomy now. It's up to me. If this person wants to die, why shouldn't they be allowed? But of course, that's changed the subject, because without wanting to be brutal about it, people can still kill themselves.
Sure.
This is not an argument about stopping
support...
anyone doing that. This is an argument about whether we should help. And that puts us in the territory of a moral decision.
So how would you feel, for example, about the, say, the legalization of a suicide drug that you could get over the counter if you were an adult and you signed some paperwork?
Well, that's happened already. That's in Oregon, basically. I mean,
yes. Do you think that approach is less problematic than, say, a doctor euthanizing you with a needle?
No, not particularly. In fact, it has its own problems, because basically those drugs, I mean, this is a correctable problem. I always think when people lead with this, it's not the most strong one, but it is true that those drugs have major complications, and there's all sorts, dying on your own, taking these poisons, which is what they are, without a medic present can be really quite traumatic, and people are not having the peaceful ends that they think they're going to have. But that's a small note, because you could definitely make more sophisticated drugs. No, I'm afraid I think in the Oregon system is extremely hands-off. We need, if the motive is compassion, and I think that's the only acceptable motive, because as I've said, autonomy arguments won't get you there. It just won't get you to assistance. Then, and also the other reason it's clearly not autonomy is that nobody is saying that absolutely everyone should have access to these drugs. So if it was really a freedom argument, they would be over the counter. Ill. It'd be over the counter for anybody. You wouldn't have to have a certain diagnosis. It wouldn't be a medical procedure. It's always what's wrong with it is being classed as a medical procedure, as if this is just another kind of treatment option, but it's death and it's poison.
Right.
So it's really not the same. So I still think that not enough attention is paid in the Oregon system to coercion, for instance. Like, there's no scrutiny of the background of the person asking to die. And yet, in simultaneous discourses, we're very concerned about things like coercive control, or, well, in the UK we are, we're worried about sending people to, or people going to deaths of despair, because they have got no other options, because they're living in a terrible abusive situation. So that's one worry. The other worry is people going before their time. I mean, going because suicide doesn't just affect the person, it affects the family left behind. And whilst assisted death organizations really want to push this idea of the family always being supportive and misty-eyed and being around the bed as you take the pills or whatever, that's not the case. That's not always the case. I mean, you don't have to be told, in fact, as a family member, that your relative is doing it at all. So it can come as a terrible shock. And for some family members, it completely destroys their trust in the whole medical system to know that a doctor colluded in killing somebody that they very much still wanted around. So for me, the whole this specter of autonomy is just a kind of superficial band-aid over a whole raft of moral issues that are much more complicated.
I'll say,
Suicide is not just about doing your own thing
hmm,
as
I'll
well.
say it's funny, and we talked about this a little, but there is a cultural element. I for one do value individual autonomy, at least for adults. I think children ultimately, are to be raised, but adults are to do what they want. And at least at the gut level, at the cultural level, I do count suicide among these, knowing what you say about this potential for coercion. But I will say, especially thinking about the state, I'm someone who spent a lot of time interacting with the healthcare system, both private and public, comparing the differences.
Mm.
Because the public healthcare here in the U.S. is a little nascent. It's not as developed, for better or worse, as the NHS.
Mm.
But I think, in my eyes, the thing that gives me the greatest amount of pause with um, assisted suicide,
Mm.
especially for people who are chronic but not necessarily immediately terminal in the physical sense, is that
Mm.
it sort of gives a permission structure, a mental and emotional permission structure for the doctor or for the system to say, well, we tried.
Mm.
We offered. I think of a woman, there's a woman who was a Paralympian. She was a paraplegic, and obviously in communities with these people online. I talk to them a lot. And
Mm.
she was trying to get a wheelchair ramp installed for her home by the
Mm.
government as an accommodation, which is, I can only be partially sympathetic to this because there is no way the American government would ever buy you a free wheelchair ramp for your home. You've got to do that
Yeah.
yourself. But anyway, she was trying to get this from the state healthcare system, and they were just dragging their feet, dragging their feet, dragging their feet. And they said, well, have you considered assisted suicide?
Mm.
The
Yeah.
like the
Because
caseworker
it's a
said this to
treatment.
her.
It's
Yes,
a
and she's
treatment.
she's what? I'm not suicidal. What are you? But for the caseworker, I imagine, um, they can go. Well, I offered something. I offered a
Yeah,
solution, right? They can write down in their
absolutely.
notes, "Oh, I did something," and then they can sort of move on. Whereas if you are coming into the care of a patient in this Hippocratic sense, in this Christian sense, with like, I must do everything possible to keep them in good health, right? Like you're actually going to be driven to provide care. So
Exactly. I
yes,
as I put it in the book, we want our doctors to have a low tolerance for inducing death. I mean,
hmm.
I think the very least we can do, if this has to happen, which apparently it does, I mean, I really don't kid myself that my book is going to be able to change much. We should never be calling it a medical procedure. It
Well,
should be outsourced. It should be kept away from doctors. It's not even that hard to do. Obviously, you're basically titrating an intravenous fluid or giving some pills. It's not,
no,
you
it's
don't
not
need a
hard to kill a
medical
person.
degree.
It's much harder to keep them
Um,
alive.
exactly. So in Canada, you've got these doctors who become specialists in death. I mean, they're often
Hmm.
obstetricians as well, which I find incredibly weird. Um, but they just go around killing people
Yes.
un- in the name of medicine. And there's something spectacularly stupid about that. It will ultimately wreck people's relationship with medicine
Uh-huh.
to know that the doctor could be saying, well, have you tried this or have you tried that? And in
Well,
the UK,
yes.
unfortunately, they're going to allow the doctor to raise it with patients off their own bat. I mean, you
Without the
don't even
patient
have to
bringing
wait to
it
be
up.
asked. Yeah,
That
the
I
doctor
don't
can be.
understand how you can take the Hippocratic Oath and then tell somebody that they might want to consider ending their life. That seems to be a very, on its face, a violation.
They think that they're doing. The thing is, once you've decided, you've conceded the principle, and you've
Hmm.
said suicide is a good thing. For some
Hmm.
people, suicide is a good thing. Okay,
Right.
so, well, if it's a good thing, I need to offer it. I need to check that it's not the right thing for this person. Now, of course, the doctor suggesting it to a patient will completely alter the
Right.
patient's, or potentially alter the patient's perspective on it. They might think, oh well, it's a steer.
Well, it's.
Anyway,
I mean,
there's hundreds of problems here as far
if
as
you
I can
stretch
see.
harm reduction to mean suffering reduction, then the greatest act of harm reduction you could do would be nuking the entire human race, I would assume. Right? Like you're bringing suffering to zero. So it does get a little messy with that.
Yeah, if you think getting rid of pain is more important than maintaining neutral or
Hmm.
increasing pleasure, then you will get people who don't mind at all that people are going before their time.
Yeah, and that's
And
that
and the
at the
other,
most extreme, and people like idealists or antinatalists who do believe
yeah,
in some way bringing about the end of the human race. I want to
yeah,
ask, and we can jump back into death, but I want to ask
that's
about
fine.
you more broadly. Um, so you spent many years of your life
Hmm.
um, picking something that you cared about, constructing very reasoned and thorough arguments about it, and putting these into the public spotlight, going through a great amount of fire and rancor. And now it seems like you are starting sort of a new cycle of doing this again on a completely different subject. So I guess my question is, what draws you to do this, and how do you choose the topic where you're going to spend years of your life, in the
All
arena?
right, that's a good question. In both cases, I genu I mean, this sounds bullshit, but it's not.
Mm,
And the reason it's not bullshit is that there were plenty of book proposals that just didn't go anywhere. But in both of these cases, I really, really
mm,
care about the issue, and I'm very much like I felt in despair when the assisted dying legislation came on the books in the UK
mm.
last year. I just thought, oh my god, I can't believe it. This
May
is
I ask if
happening.
if you're religious personally?
I'm ish, but the book's secular. The book is
Mm,
explicitly secular. There's nothing about God in it, that,
mm,
But I mean, I was raised a Catholic,
mm.
and I've lapsed, and obviously I'm a lesbian as well, so that doesn't really go down well. But I couldn't say that I'm an atheist. But I don't use any of that in my explicit thinking. I just think
Sure.
that even if I was completely atheist, I would be horrified at the picture of the world that is emerging at the moment. I feel like I've only touched the surface in our discussion. Obviously, there's so much more to say, but even if you just take our attitude to suicide generally, like
Hmm.
what attitude do we take to suicide generally when doctors are giving it as a good thing?
Hmm.
How does that affect what we say to the suicidal 19-year-old? Um, I feel that at the moment everything seems to be in flux. Very things that we have relied on as a kind of tale of Christianity, they're crumbling. What is going to be put in place? And as far as I can see, liberal society just has freedom and choice, and
Hmm.
that gets us that takes us to hell quite fast, I think.
How do you, obviously, in certain ways, you're advocating for a specific future or against a specific future. Where do you derive these feelings of where we should be going as a society? I mean, you said you're lapsed as a Catholic. Obviously, a Catholic worldview could be the foundation for a vision of the future. Where does your vision of the future and what's good come from?
Oh, I don't have a particularly pronounced vision of the future. I just can
Mm,
see um, the I want the least worst future. That's in both these issues. Whether it's like teenagers cutting their breasts off,
mm,
or mentally ill teenagers being euthanized eventually. I um i feel the harm that something is so obviously wrong with
yes,
that you don't need to have an elaborate utopian kind of vision to fight it. And
right.
in general, I don't. But I think the thing that's become clear to me through all of this is that by today's standards, I'm a social conservative. That's not something
Hmm.
I would have said 20 years ago. I, but I think so. Being a social conservative is always relative to what's happening around you,
Of course.
and things that are happening around me, and that I see reflected in the culture, I really think are bad. So if
I think I
that's,
see the through line here. The through
yeah.
line is doctors. You obviously have a bone to pick with British doctors. What have doctors ever done to you?
Well, I was just thinking my sister's a doctor. I was thinking,
Okay.
it feels like psychoanalysis.
How does she feel about
No,
this?
but doctors are expressing. I mean, it's not unusual that I would focus on doctors because they have the capacity to do a lot of harm,
Mm,
especially when they're imbued with a certain kind of authority. And what's
Hmm.
happening as these norm structures all change is it's happening very unreflectively. Like, so for instance, somebody was telling me about a conference that they went to in Europe. It was a child psychiatry conference, like masses of child psychiatrists there, and
Hmm.
they had a session on euthanasia. And they had
Hmm.
I think a teenager or a young woman in her 20s on stage saying that she wanted to die and that she was going to be able to die, and this was a good thing. And her doctor was beside her, and apparently, the way it was told to me, lots of psychiatrists were like quite stunned and didn't know what to do with this or how to even to ask questions about it because it seemed like so out of their experience. But nonetheless, there are, it's happening. There are true believers who think, yes, if she wants to, then she should. And she's suffered a long time and we've exhausted all the options for her. And why shouldn't she be able to? And this sort of thinking, nobody seems to be able to push back against it.
Hmm.
Now, it doesn't really matter that sort of thinking in horticulture, perhaps, or
I'm waiting for the Kathleen Stock horticulture
oh,
polemics.
probably the
Yes.
thing is, it probably matters everywhere, but it really matters when your doctor
Hmm.
is going along with this stuff because they don't know what else to say, and you know, patient choice is becoming the absolute mantra. Patient choice, and you get a vending machine model of medicine, which is like, well, if the patient wants it, he should get it. That's what's happening, as far as I can see. So it
Hmm.
doesn't seem unnatural for me as a philosopher who's interested in ethics to focus there.
Now, I believe I read that you were raised at least partially in Scotland. Is that right?
Yeah, well,
I
yeah,
feel like I
wholly.
just heard the, and I'm not good at identifying specific dialects, but I feel like I just heard the tiniest little bit of a Scottish inflection in
Mm,
there. That's
I've
funny.
got a sort of double. I don't know what the technical term for it is, but I have two accents. So if you were Scottish, I would be speaking to you in a Scottish accent.
Oh, yes,
But
we call that code switching in America, at
yeah,
least. Yes.
right. Well, I
Um,
do that.
so I'm curious. You said philosopher, and you absolutely are, by any definition, a philosopher. But when did you realize you were a philosopher? How did this happen? It almost seems like a term that it's like a heavy
Mm.
crown to put on yourself. It's a lot of weight to call yourself a
Well,
philosopher.
I had a bit of an advantage because, or disadvantage, whatever you want to want to say. My dad was an academic philosopher,
Hmm.
so I knew, although I didn't really know what it was, I knew he was one. And then I did, so I chose philosophy and kind of
It's the
really did
family
sort of
business.
fall into it.
Your dad worked at the Ideas Factory, so you're
He
gonna
was
go work at the
exactly,
Ideas Factory.
exactly. He said, don't, but he was saying to me, don't do it, don't do it. But
Uh-huh.
obviously I didn't listen.
It's
Um,
funny. I also want to ask, you said social conservative. Do you ever, now being one, without having really changed who you are, just from changing times,
hmm.
you ever look around at the figurative social conservative convention and go, "Oh, who are these weird people that I'm sharing a
No,
label with? Does this
that's a very
disturb you?"
young, if you don't mind me saying, that's the sort of thing that young people care about. But, and
Yeah.
obviously I used to, but really, um, oh, I think I also got inured to that during the gender stuff because, of course, I'm sure you're very familiar that the first thing a left winger will do to you is tell you that you're on the same side as, and then they will list a basket of
Yeah.
deplorables that you're supposed to go, oh my God, no, I cannot possibly be on the same side as them. I will immediately change my position.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not psychologically very acute. But it's kind of like shaming you, and I just suddenly thought, well, if I agree with, I don't know, whoever they're saying, like Putin, Orban,
Yes.
Trump, whoever, if I agree with them on the fact that males and females can't change sex and etc., so fucking what, it really, this is school ground
Mm.
stuff. So
Like
do
agreeing
I
with
look at my
them
fellow
about.
social
Mhm.
conservatives? The thing is, also the other thing is, some of them are absolutely brilliant and they've got moral backbone, which we could do more with. So, I
Sure.
no is the short answer.
That's no, that makes sense. And I think actually in a funny way when somebody does that to you, say, "Oh,
Mm,
you're in a camp with so and so. You're
mm,
just like them." They're actually admitting that they know that you don't like that person in some way, because if you did agree completely with, say, Putin, you would go, "Of course, I
Yeah,
love Putin." So
yeah.
they're actually saying that they know that you have some umbrage with Putin for that to even try and get under your skin,
Well, of
right?
course. So what they only ever do this to people like me because they see me
Right.
as like in the middle
Exactly.
and intensely reasonable. And as we started this whole conversation, I said I don't want to upset anybody. Actually, I don't want to upset anyone, and people know
Hmm.
this about me, so they know they can pick on me, um, or they think they can, because they think, oh, she doesn't want to be, like you say, she doesn't want to be seen with these awful
Hmm.
people over there. But as it turns out, just call their fucking bluff. Say, I don't care. And then they really don't have a leg to stand on.
Do you ever this is another sort of across the Atlantic question. Do you
Mm.
find yourself contending with limits of what is legal in your speech as a columnist, as a writer?
Well, I write for Unheard, which is extremely freeing because, I mean, so no. Um,
Wouldn't they still be
no, I
beholden
mean, it's
to?
recently clarified.
Mhm.
The law has been clarified over the last 5 years about what you can say about sex and gender. Um, so believe it or not, gender being gender critical, which is what I count as, is a protected belief
Mhm.
now, which is sort of ridiculous, but useful. Because before that, we were always being kicked off Twitter or kicked out of our jobs, or there was. So I don't know that the law was ever against us, but people certainly thought the law was against us. You thought you couldn't say trans woman is a man,
Right.
and now you can. So
Interesting. Yes, that's very different. Although I do think at the California level, we don't really go piecemeal on beliefs, but we do, like, there's a law that says you can't fire someone in California for their political beliefs, which of course in effect, right, would be much more utilized um
mhm.
for someone on the left, say like a labor organizer, right? I think if you fired somebody for say being a skinhead or a neo-Nazi, and they tried to invoke this law, I actually
Mm.
don't know what would happen. That I guess we'll find out probably someday soon. But yeah,
Yeah.
so that's all very interesting to me. I want to ask about Unheard. Could you, just
Mhm.
for people who don't know, tell us a little about what Unheard is and how you got involved?
So Unheard's a online magazine. It comes out every day. It has like 5 or 6 pieces a day. I
Mm.
think it has some pretty amazing writers, I think. So the idea is Unheard with a capital HERD, like
Mm-hmm.
not the herd. And in my view, it really does do a good job of fielding views across the political spectrum. The whole idea is it's supposed to be something that you won't hear elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that we always achieve that, but you try. And they also have a big interest in philosophy and history of ideas and stuff like that, as well as politics. They also have it. They have a US version now. So Sohrab Ahmari, um, I don't know if you know who that is, but he came from the.
No.
He used to have a column at the New York Post, and then he started a magazine called Compact, and then he's moved to
Mm.
Unheard.
Yeah,
So he
familiar.
manages the US section. So how I got involved in it is just that as I left my job under enormous publicity
Mm-hmm.
at the time, uh, one of their editors asked me to write for them, and because I'd been writing a blog, so he'd read my
Oh, I
blog.
see.
So first of all, he asked me to just if he could just reproduce a couple of my blog pieces,
Mm-hmm.
and then I started writing more often, and it's just gone pretty well.
Well, that's good. That's good. Yes, the reason I asked about Unheard um, is because I keep finding that Futurist Letters has all these sort of strange mycelial connections that I wasn't even aware of. Like our very first guest when we started this show was a playwright named Matthew Gazda, who's in New York, and
Mm-hmm.
I believe he's in his late 30s. He's um, I don't
I've
know.
seen his name in the last week, I think,
You've
on
seen his name,
Unheard.
yes. So it turned out Matthew also writes for Unheard, and I'm not sure if they approached him or he approached them, But when I saw him and I saw you and I saw that, and I realized that completely independently we had reached out to two of the same people, I thought, oh, there's something, I don't exactly know what it is, but there is something going on here culturally as far as this network of people
I hope
discussing
so.
philosophy and
I hope so. I find
Western
it like
culture.
I feel very pleased to be there because not only do I really enjoy writing for them, but then I really actually do always enjoy reading the stuff there, and I learn a lot from reading other people there. So I know this sounds incredibly like um, fake and insincere, but it's actually true.
No,
I really
no,
do
no.
like Unheard.
I think what might sound fake and insincere to you, at least for someone from Los Angeles, is just standard conversation. So,
Yeah,
so
that's
no, don't
true.
worry
But
about
I'm
that.
British, so normally I would never say this sort of thing, but it is actually true.
Yeah. I have, just out of my personal curiosity, have you ever been artistically inclined in any medium?
No, I mean I have a unexpressed desire to write fiction like everybody else, but um,
Well, you could
I,
always
you know,
express it.
I know I could. I know. Once I've got the death and the doctors and the
Hmm.
mastectomies out of the way, I think I would enjoy writing satire. I'm pretty sure I would enjoy writing satire.
I think
So,
that would be very fun. I think you come from the land of the best
mm,
satirists
yes.
possibly to ever live. So,
But also, I've
uh,
come from the academia, which is the land where I don't know. In a way, it's sort of impossible to satirize the things I've seen. They just reality is overtaken.
yes,
But
I think
yeah,
as the
lots of
tide goes
material.
out on some of these sort of waves of cultural fancy, it's almost going to be
Mm.
hard. I think it's going to be hard for me,
It
I hope
is.
anyway, to explain to my kids exactly how it was at the time when, like for me when I was
I
becoming an
know.
adult in college, it was just absurd the things people were saying.
Well, exactly. I mean,
Mhm.
my consolation is that my son's generation are like they have no illusions about it. They just think it's ridiculous and they mock it. You know, all the gender queer stuff. They're so over it. So over it.
Now, do you think you might be in a bubble as far as the people of that age that you interact with, or do you really think that's representative? And roughly how old is your
Obviously,
son
I
as
don't
well for
think I would
context?
never say it's representative because that's silly. That would be like a sample of two for a start. But their
Sure.
friends. I mean, I've heard other people say it. I don't know. I can see how obviously I might want it to be true, but it
Right.
seems to me to make sense in the sense that so much of this gender stuff was fashion. I mean, really, it got dressed up and it got dressed up as morality. It got seized upon by middle-aged people, but a lot of it was being generated by kids on the internet mucking around. Um,
Well, you might have
and
strong opinions
fashions
on this. Go
change.
ahead.
No, I
Yes,
was just going to say fashions change.
you might have strong opinions on this, especially being a lesbian, but I think there's a perspective among some people that the gender identity movement, in many ways, saw the very rapid successes of the gay marriage movement and
Mm-hmm.
said, we're going to run this same rhetorical playbook involving,
Mm-hmm.
it's innate, it's you're born into it, it's a matter of fairness, civil rights, etc. Right? And where that seemed to have mostly succeeded, at least in the West, it seemed like they tried to go down the exact same path and hit a completely different circumstance. What would you
Mm-hmm.
say went into that?
Well, I think you're right in the sense. I'm trying to remember the name of a book I read. It's by a right winger called Daryl Paul, and he basically wrote about how same-sex marriage came to America so fast, um, bearing in mind that it just kind of came from nowhere, and then like in a very relatively short space of time, it was majority accepted. And
Mm-hmm.
he describes it happening quite a lot through HR organizations. It became a high status kind of thing to agree with, like equality in marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And in the UK, maybe that's true also, but basically, these HR organizations in the UK that were sort of LGBT lobbying organizations, but had enormously powerful links into almost every institution. They brought gay marriage in, then they had nothing else to do. And they could have wound up, but they didn't, obviously, because they wanted to keep the money flowing in. So then the whole trans stuff just became the new gravy train, and it was a
Interesting.
massive gravy train. I mean, because you had such a big program of work, you had to basically unpick all the social arrangements that were predicated on sex and replace them with gender identity.
I guess that, yeah, that's
Mad
another
ambition.
question. Just on that subject of man and woman, which I personally don't even, if it takes you an entire book to try and get a definition, I, not being an analytic philosopher, certainly am not going to try
What,
myself.
man and woman? You don't need a bloody book, mate.
All right.
You
Well,
already know what a man and a woman is.
I guess what I'm saying is, yes, it seems like there's a large body of law. Or certainly, your country has hundreds of years of laws on the books. Our country does as well, and that do address men and women. Like, for example, for us here in the United States, we have the Selective Service Act, and I know people. I know people, female sex, who've transitioned to identifying as male. I don't know any of them who've gone out of their way to try and get registered for the draft following their transition. But I guess that's sort of what it comes down to, right? It's like, what are the legal areas where you push, and what are the legal areas where sex remains
Oh yeah,
the
100%.
the the status quo?
Like
You know?
primogeniture is one.
Yeah.
Even in the it's so funny, in the original Gender Recognition Act that they brought in here in 2004, I think. It says something like, I can't remember exactly the wording, but
Mm.
you change your legal gender for all contexts and all purposes. And then in the very next clause, it says, except for inheritance. So basically, the male line in the aristocratic families will
Right.
continue to go through the male line, and you can't just
So
identify
does
your way
does that
into an
include the
inheritance.
say with the royal family, if they had all girls and
Oh
then
yeah, I'm
one
sure.
transitioned, that
I'm sure.
they wouldn't jump the queue to be
Yeah,
king, as it were?
exactly. And also there was I mean, all when we're talking about how satirizable this all is, that's
Hmm.
this is just a good example. The another one was the Freemasons. At one point the Freemasons changed their criteria so they would admit what you would call, I don't know, what someone would call cis men,
Hmm.
trans women, and trans men, but no cis women. So basically, the only people that couldn't come into the Freemasons were cis women.
That's funny.
Um,
Yeah, I've heard of
you know,
proposals. You were talking about ways to divide sports and what
mm.
intersex and trans people should do in sports. And one proposal I've seen is to sort of have the cis women's league and then the all comers league. you know,
Yeah,
um,
I think that's.
that sounds like a little like what the Freemasons were thinking. That,
I mean,
although I don't know.
I think there's a sort of sensible. There's a kind of, you can see the point of that in a way, like protect women's sport, because
Hmm.
um, genetically women just don't have the advantage of someone who's had a puberty that's been
Hmm.
fueled by testosterone. And then
Unless it were
if
like color recognition, I think is one of the things.
color recognition.
Yeah, women are
Okay.
better at picking out the difference
Oh,
between
I
colors.
see. Oh,
Yes.
yeah, maybe darts
Hmm.
or something.
Hmm.
But yeah, um, so then you can have an open section, and if somebody is like basically crazy enough, some female is crazy enough to think she can go up against uh, these
Hmm.
men, then
Hmm.
good on her, fine.
Hmm.
But in my experience, it's a bit like we just said about the draft. Females don't want to go into that category. It's men
Right.
that want to come into the female category. And
Hmm.
why is that, one wonders? Because they can win, obviously, partly.
Yeah. I I don't know. I try to hold back from speculating on decisions like that, but it certainly does draw one's attention. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
grateful that there are people who are willing to go into that arena and discuss these matters for the sake of our society. I know we said we were going to make it about an hour, so
Mm-hmm.
I think that we probably should be pretty close to
Okay.
wrapping it up. Do you have a name for your upcoming book so people can keep an eye out for it?
I do. It's called "Do Not Go Gentle: The Case Against Assisted Death." "Do Not Go Gentle" is a line from a famous poem by
Mm-hmm.
Dylan Thomas, which is worth
Mm-hmm.
reading.
Yes, I'm familiar, and it's certainly evocative, and I do see this latent artistic streak in you that I'll be very excited to see if it
Okay.
ever comes out. I
Yeah,
know
me
it's
too.
it's evening for you, so I want to thank you for taking the time out of your
Pleasure.
evening to come on, especially because I just want to say to your credit, you were not only so kind when I reached out, you also agreed to come on at a point where we essentially had no track record for the show. So,
No, I know, but I read your piece. I read one of your pieces, and it was
oh,
really a brilliant
thank
piece of
you.
writing.
Thank you.
And
And
I
as it
sent it
turns
to a
out,
friend of
we're,
mine who also found it very, um, I don't know,
oh
very
yes, and this
interesting.
piece
So
was The Cure was the name of it, and
yeah,
that
The
was
Cure.
about dealing with
People should read that. That's a great piece.
quadriplegia and various um, potential medical outcomes, none of which are assisted dying. But
Yeah.
yes, we'll see. There is a drug. It's funny. There's a drug that I'm quite hopeful about
Mm-hmm.
um, for
What's it
uh,
called?
for living. Actually, it's called NVG291. It doesn't have a brand name yet. It
Okay.
has been in development for a while, but the way it works is essentially what they have found, and this gets into the weeds a little bit, but obviously this is of interest to me.
Mm-hmm.
They find that with spinal cord injuries, there is very slow nerve regeneration, very slow,
Uh-huh.
millimeters over years. But what happens is that there's a sort of protective scar tissue that forms much more quickly, that sort of caps everything off and caulks in the damaged area. And
Right. Okay.
so, what this peptide does, and it's injected actually kind of like, say, Ozempic or something like that, you inject it weekly and it enters the bloodstream and it targets and breaks down the scar tissue that has
Right.
filled in that damaged area. And what they have found in rats, anyway, is that when you habitually break down that scar tissue and get it out of there, the nerves
Mm-hmm.
actually do have a chance to regrow. So, to
Whoa.
what extent, they're not sure, but they just did a trial where they saw, I believe, 400% average increase in motor function over a few months for the people in the
Whoa.
trial. This was in
Gosh.
Chicago, I believe. And
Wow.
unfortunately, because of the way our FDA works, it probably won't be approved even if everything goes perfectly until about 2029. But we'll see. I'll keep my eyes
Yeah.
out for any trials.
As
And
you said in that piece, you're just, well, you didn't put it like this exactly, but fingers crossed that some kind of tech billionaire has a terrible accident and
yeah,
suddenly becomes deeply invested in
yeah, yes. And
bringing
I
the
think
technology forward.
I give myself a rule against wishing harm on people for the most part, but
It was a joke. It was a
it
joke.
was a joke, yes. But it's also true that I would love for somebody with a lot of money to become personally invested in some way in moving this forward. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll see. Maybe one of them will start listening to the show.
Maybe.
Um,
Maybe.
well, one more time, thank you very much for
Thank
coming
you,
on.
Cairo.
Do I still call you professor?
No,
Or you said
definitely
no
not.
longer a prof in
No,
your
I'm not a prof
bio, right?
anymore.
Okay.
Definitely. It's fine.
Well, a writer, a philosopher, a very interesting person. Thank you both for coming on and being part of the discourse. I will
That's all
see you
right.
around the internet. And as for
Yep.
you listeners, if you are a paying subscriber, please stick around for the after show, where I think I will probably just opine in the soliloquy. So we'll see how that goes. And if you want to sponsor the show, this is again where your sponsor message will go. So please consider becoming a sponsor and or a paying subscriber, helping keep these interviews free for everybody. Until next time, my name is Cairo Smith. This has been the Futurist Letters Show, and we will see you next week. Bye.